Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of YWCA Edmonton staff and the Board of Directors, I want to warmly welcome you to our Power Lunch Speaker Series. I'm Amber Niemeyer, the Director of External Relations for the YWCA. As we begin, I want to respectfully acknowledge that YWCA Edmonton is located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community today. The YWCA has been proudly serving and empowering women and families in the Edmonton region for 113 years. We've been there through world wars, the Spanish flu, and many other trying times, and we've been there with a helping hand. The COVID-19 pandemic has been no different. We are hard at work helping vulnerable women and families in our community get through this crisis and ensuring that important women's perspectives are at every decision-making table during this critical time. We launched the Power Lunch Speaker Series last year as part of our COVID-19 response plan. And while physical distancing rules still prohibit us from gathering in person, it's vitally important that we continue to remain connected with each other and with our community. The Power Lunch series allows us to come together and spotlight and celebrate the work of women who are doing incredible things to make our world a better place in this difficult time. Today, we are highlighting our CEO, Katherine O'Neill, whose first day on the job at the YWCA was the same day our Prime Minister urged the country to stay home to help manage the COVID-19 crisis. We are also joined by our moderator, Brandi Morin. We first connected with Brandi last year as a moderator for one of our previous Power Lunch sessions. She is an award-winning French, Cree, Iroquois journalist who has spent the last decade sharing Indigenous stories which have influenced reconciliation in Canada's political, cultural, and social environments. She is one of Canada's most prominent journalistic voices on Indigenous issues with an insatiable passion for justice. Brandi is a survivor of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and she uses the experience to shed light on the ongoing genocidal crisis in Canada. Her passion for human rights, justice, cultural revitalization, the environment, and reconciliation has inspired and empowered Indigenous and mainstream audiences across the world. And we are proud to call her a friend of the YWCA. With that, everyone, grab your lunch and prepare to be inspired. Brandi, over to you.
Hi. Thank you, Amber. It's such an honor to be here today. I first connected with Katherine, I believe, last summer and was a part of the Power Lunch series in the fall. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Katherine for those who aren't familiar with her work. So she joined the YWCA Edmonton as Chief Executive Officer on March 16th, 2020. She is a passionate advocate for the rights of girls and women and inspiring people to hear the importance of community service. Positions in communications and politics with several not-for-profit boards and committees, including organizations with a focus on early childhood education, literacy, and disability services. She currently serves on the River Valley Alliance Board as a Director at Large for the City of Edmonton. Katherine holds a Bachelor of Arts from Wilfrid Laurier University and a Master of Journalism from Carleton University. Wow. Again, I am so honored to be here with you today, Katherine. Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you via Zoom and to have this chat about how it's been for the last year since you joined the YWCA. And did you ever have a year? You came in on the day that Canada basically shut down. That must have been a whirlwind. Can you take us back there?
Well, first of all, Tansei, Brandi, thank you for doing this with us. You have been a big part of our years. So I love that you're here and helping us with this event. So welcome everyone who's tuned in today. It's a great honor. A year in, that day, March 16th, was, like everyone else, a day that none of us will forget. I woke up that morning, I knew stuff was going on. We all did. Schools had been canceled. But I wasn't quite, we really weren't sure where this was all going. So went into the office, we sat down, we were having a leadership team meeting. And by lunchtime, before I even had a chance to figure out where the bathrooms were, we had to make the very difficult decision to not only send everyone home, but close our office to the public for the very first time, I think, ever in the history of YWCA Edmonton. So huge decisions on day one. And, what's been a big thing for me is that I love people and getting to meet people. And I still to this day even haven't met probably half of our staff in person. So it was quite a day. It's been quite a year for everyone that's joined this call. And I really hope that when people walk away from today, just learning about, from each other, about our experiences and how we've all kind of come along in the last 12 months.
Yes. And so, you did work in Afghanistan. You were reporting from war zones. And from what I understand, this experience with the pandemic, was similar to what you experienced there. Can you explain like what that was and in doing what you do?
Well, and in my whole career, I've worked in crisis situations as a journalist. You would go, as Brandi, you're a journalist. You sometimes go into really, situations that are very tense. There's chaos, uncertainty, and you're trying to bring order to the situation and tell a story and communicate what's happening. So, I feel like all of that has helped prepare me for this leadership role. I have been on the front lines of the war in Afghanistan and saw humankind at their very worst. And when COVID hit, it really did take me back to that feeling of just not knowing what's next. And as Canadians, we're not used to that. We are not used to huge things happening, huge once in a century pandemics happening. And we look to our leaders for calm, for clarity, for hope, and all of those things to help us take our short-term steps, but also those long-term steps that we need to do as a community. So I really, those first few months were, to me, I viewed that as a time where, not just bringing together our team and making sure that we were really communicating clearly, but also in our community, the role that we had as the YWCA Edmonton. We've been here since 1907. And as Amber mentioned, we have been here in world wars. We have been here in a pandemic before. And during all of those crises, we were able to help our community not just get through them, but thrive through them. And we innovated during those periods. For example, during World War I, that's when we, in 1916, set up our Camp You Ocus. So during World War I, we set up this program to help, get women into nature and to teach them about nature. After World War II, we helped set up the very first licensed childcare in our city because of women going into the workforce. So we not only, keeping on with our incredible services and programs for women and girls during this trying time, but also how can we be a powerful voice for equity during this very unprecedented time in our history? So it's, like I said, it's been an honor. I think my career has helped prepare me for this moment. I love bringing people together and getting big things done. It's hard when you can't do it in person and you're over Zoom, but where there's a will, there's a way.
Wow. That's you probably had no idea that that's what you were stepping into, but you were prepared for that along the way. That's really, really powerful. So what would you say have been like your top 3 highlights of this past year in your role?
Oh, there's been a lot of highlights. I think one of the top ones is just the fact that right away, very quickly, we were able to pivot our services and programs either online or find ways to ensure that we could keep doing them in person as safely as possible. And so, for example, we have a counseling services department at YWCA. We help, particularly women who are fleeing domestic violence or families that are in a family violence situation with counseling. And so in 2020, we went from all in-person sessions to either phone or telehealth online. And we had a record number in 2020 of subsidized counseling services sessions. So that really proud of the work that our entire team has done in all of our departments to figure out a way to keep serving our community. And then, number two would be the fact during this time, we knew that women and particularly girls were being disproportionately affected by this pandemic. And we saw that really early on. So as a collective, not just the YW Edmonton, but the other YWs in Alberta and YWCA Canada, really started quickly figuring out, okay, what's happening on the ground? What are the challenges? Everything from a rise in unpaid labor to a rise in gender-based violence. So really figuring out quickly what is happening, what are the problems, what are the challenges, and then coming up with really good solutions to help go to government, either municipally, provincially, federally, businesses, community members, to say, here's a roadmap to helping ensure that women and girls are not going to be left behind in this crisis. Because normally in particularly a recession or a traumatic time in our, like a global event like this, men are disproportionately affected, but this has been a very different crisis. And so that's the number two. And then just number three, we've done extra stuff like the Power Lunch program that we launched and the partnerships we forged there. We have a Searching for Izina project where we're helping commemorate the 100th anniversary this year of the very first woman being elected in Edmonton. So still going along and doing things that still need to be getting done in a crisis situation. So lots to be proud of. It has been a team effort from day one, and we've been really happy to be reaching out and collaborating with partners in our community to also get the job done. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've been able to do in the past 12 months.
Congratulations. It's amazing. So can you tell me a little bit about the camp and what, how it was transformed to be able to accommodate, individuals and families to enjoy during COVID? I was very fascinated when I found out about, renting a yurt and, renting out cabins in, nature. So can you tell us what you did there?
Yeah, I'm incredibly proud of the team. So Camp You Ocus is located about an hour west of the city on Lake Wabamun, and like I said, we have had a camp program on Lake Wabamun since 1916. So again, I'm walking into this role. All this change is happening. It's often, we've had that camp run year round since since World War I in some capacity. And so we walk in and it's usually we run a children's camp over the summer and immediately have to look at, well, that's not going to happen. So what can we do to still ensure that we can get folks safely outside, that we can still keep the camp running? Because that was a huge priority for me. We have amazing staff at Camp You Ocus, and I wanted to keep people, ensure that we had a strategy to ensure that the camp wouldn't be closed down, because a lot of camps made decisions to just shut down during this period because it wasn't clear what you could do. But we closely watched the public health orders, and we came up with solutions like the family fun days, where you would go out to the camp with your cohort and use our beautiful property to do hiking or canoeing. And then the other thing that's been really incredible, and we would not have been able to do it if we hadn't had partners like IKEA Canada or the Adams Agency, was they came and donated products and service to help transform some of our cabins into these beautiful retreats where you can go with your family and all of the proceeds benefit YWCA Edmonton and our camp. And so it's a real win-win. We've kept it as affordable as we can, because I don't know about you, Brandi, but getting outside during COVID has been a lifesaver for me.
Yeah.
It is everything. We are so lucky to have those outdoor spaces to just keep us grounded, to keep us connected to the earth, and to remind us that all the seasons will be there, and life goes on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I hope everyone gets a chance to get out to Camp You Ocus at some point. And again, I can't thank our staff enough for just every week we'd have to rethink, okay, what can we do safely? How can we do it? The logistics were really difficult, but we've managed to figure out a really incredible way to get people out to You Ocus.
Yeah, and you have like an amazing yurt with, fully accommodating, it has bunk beds and,
Yeah.
I mean, is this camp going to be open like throughout the summer still? Do you know? Like for rentals?
Well, and this is a situation we're still figuring it out. And that's been just, every day we come in and we try to figure out. The plan so far is we're hoping to be operating at least a children's camp in some capacity this summer.
Nice.
Depending on public health orders. So we're really watching that closely, and then also keeping those cabin rentals going if
Yeah.
possible, and those one-off programs where people can go out with their cohorts to use the property. So I'm really excited by that. And again, it just shows like the YWCA, we do all of these different services and programs, and at the end of the day, I always say our mission is just equality, choice, and opportunity for everyone, and that includes nature and includes getting out with family and learning those skills, and so I'm incredibly proud of that work, and I hope people, if you go to our website, you can get more information about the camp.
Honestly, yeah, I agree with you. Nature is also an essential need for us. Absolutely. So looking forward, Katherine, what are your plans now for moving the YMCA through the rest of the pandemic?
And that's a big question. And I think, it's a call to action to everyone listening. We've got a lot of big decisions ahead of us. One thing that we're going to definitely keep up in the next, year and long term is just what I talked about earlier, with the fact that we are always been a powerful voice for equity in our community. And this is a really pivotal time in our history as a community about, we're seeing a lot of women leaving the workforce. We're losing a lot of these gains that have taken generations to achieve. So how do we as an organization come together to show the path forward to ensure that women, particularly when it comes to women's participation in the workforce, that we don't lose those grounds? And that, a lot of that comes back to showing the way around childcare and what that looks like post-pandemic. So doing that advocacy work, talking to other organizations in our province to see how we can help not only governments but businesses figure out really creative solutions to what's happening, because post-pandemic is really going to be where, how do we figure out what's next, and not just go back to what we had before, but better. We have a chance to fix what was broken, and I think there was a lot broken about where we were coming from. And so if we've learned anything, that yes, we want things to get, we all want to get back to work, and we want things to get back to quote normal, but normal wasn't great for everybody. There's lots of people that had been left behind. And so how do we help there? When it comes to gender-based violence, we do a lot of advocacy work. We have seen a rise in gender-based violence during COVID, and we're very concerned post-COVID that we will see higher rates of domestic violence and abuse. And we're doing a lot of work with organizations around the province to ensure that there's a strategy in place to not only help women when they need it and their families, but also preventative measures. We know it's happening. We need to shine the brightest light possible on that, and to say, okay, here's ways we can help make sure that every woman feels safe and every girl feels safe, no matter who you are or where you come from. And then from a services and programming perspective, that's something that's, as the CEO, I always top of mind, keeps me up late at night. What does it look like post-pandemic? Before pandemic, all of our counseling, like I said, was in person. Well, does it need to remain in person? We have heard from some of our clients that they like the fact they didn't have to get a babysitter or do parking to come down to the office. So finding what our programs will look post-pandemic. So that's a big part of what we're doing. And we have amazing youth programs that have gone online, sexual health programs. So I see that there'll be some sort of hybrid model. So again, looking at our community and saying what works, what can we do better, and how can we do things differently? I'm excited by that. I love change. I thrive under change. And so I'm looking forward to the next few months and years as we dig out of this horrific event in our community.
So, Katherine, what does your typical day look like nowadays in this pandemic? Walk us through maybe what you would be doing.
A lot of Zoom calls. I have 3 kids, 3 children under 10 years old. So, like a lot of people on this call, I'm sure either you have children or there's elder care. I have a whole life outside of it and that's been affected by the pandemic. And, just bringing that perspective to work every day is really important, because if I'm affected as much as I'm affected, our staff's affected, our clients are so affected. So keeping that perspective top of mind is critical. And, most of my days are spent on Zoom calls, reaching out to folks, hearing what's happening on the ground, understanding how it's going to impact our services and programs, also finding funding. Alberta had already been hit by an economic downturn before the pandemic. So ensuring the long-term financial stability of our organization is one of my top jobs. I work with our board really closely. We've kept that as a really huge priority for our organization, because we can't help others if we're not financially stable. And so that is a really huge thing that I always come into work thinking, how can we make sure that we have the right funds to make sure that we are here not just today, but for another 100 years. So I come in and I often am talking to a lot of community members, and I think anybody who's on this call who I've spoken to, I talk to a lot of other not-for-profit leaders, business leaders, government officials, to really understand how we fit into the picture and how we can help. And then just talking to our staff, I'm always trying to make sure that we're ahead of what's happening, and that I'm seeing things, making sure that I'm staying ahead of what they're seeing as well, because often they'll come and tell us, for example, we're with our youth programming, a lot of young girls in our community are feeling there's a lot of, it's a very tough time if you're a young woman in high school, you're on Zoom, there's all the online bullying and harassment, what's happening there, and how, as an organization, how can we help those girls and ensure that they come out of this pandemic and thriving, and et cetera. So that's kind of a typical day. I wouldn't say it's ever the same. What I love, one of the big silver linings of the pandemic, and I am such a people person, but I will admit that being able to Zoom into a call with someone in Ottawa or somebody, around the world, and get information and solve problems as quickly as we're doing has been great. Where we need to find the balance is when you go home at the end of the day that work stops, it's easy for it to just bleed into your life. So I'm sure I'm like everyone else, where it's hard to tell where the day starts and ends. And I think that will be a massive challenge for all of us. And you're hearing a siren.
So, Katherine, how many days have you actually spent in the actual office?
Actually, a lot, because I'm actually normally the only person in the office. We're located downtown Edmonton, and because of the 3 children that I mentioned, it's often easier for me to have quiet phone calls in the office. My partner, Tim is at home. He's working from home. So I'm in the office quite a bit, but like I said earlier, I still haven't met all of our staff in person. So that was that was a loss I felt, that coming into a new job, I was really looking forward to connecting with people in person, obviously. And that has been something that over these last 12 months, this just hasn't been possible. So I'm here, but I would say 95% of our staff are either home or there's a kind of a combo, but we really want our staff to be at home and safe as possible during this time. And until things are safe, we're not going to be reopening our office.
So in your role as a leader and the CEO of this incredible organization, it's part of what you do is to lead. There must have been extra pressure when this pandemic came, as employees, clients, and others were looking to you for that leadership and perhaps reassurance. What was that like, and where did you draw from, and how did you go about that? I'm curious.
Well, one thing I did, and I'm a huge student of history, and one of the things that actually drew me to the YW was its history and its legacy in our community. Like I said, 1907, that's before women had the right to vote. That's before a lot of big, big, well, progress, frankly, for women had started. It was just happening around that in the early 1900s, when women were starting to organize. So I would often, there's this book in my office, and it's a book that was written in 1957, and it kind of looked back at the first few years of the YW history. And I'd often look at that book, and I would look at what was done and the many hands over many years that had done that work to inspire me that, there are so many bad days in the history of our community and of the world, and that they got through it. And it's so, drawing from that past was really powerful for me. And I often reached out. We have a huge alumni network, and some of them will be on this call. I picked up the phone and called many of them to just get advice and to kind of walk through, if I had a question or wasn't sure about something. So drawing upon their knowledge. I also reached out often to just experienced leaders in our community, counselors, folks that were also dealing with these massive challenges. Your finances are taking a hit. You've got the staff, you want your staff to be safe. You still need to do programs and services. So I really reached out to quite a few folks, and thank you to anyone on this call who took my calls during that time, because I needed to be able to talk through a lot of these things with other people, because I think in a time of crisis, and it's really interesting, particularly this crisis, that we look to our leaders for the answers. We're just so used to looking to our leaders for answers. And there was just no playbook for this. There's no playbook for it still. We are still kind of trying to figure things out. And I see that as a massive opportunity for our organization, because of our strong mission and vision, to step up and say, here's a great path forward, follow us, help us. We want to inspire you that there is a better way to not only work post-pandemic, but there's a way that we can deal with this long crisis of gender-based violence and all of these other things. So that has been really eye-opening, I'm sure, with you too, Brandi. We look to our leaders, and when they don't have these answers just at their fingertips, that can be really difficult. And I think that created a ton of anxiety in our community, because you'd look at these press conferences and everyone's kind of doing things differently, and a lot of things weren't making sense. And in those early months, we talked about this before we hopped on this call, that we didn't know where this was going. It was a cliff. It really felt.
I still don't know though where it's going.
Yeah, I know. But again, so I go back to the fact, well, if there is no playbook, which I love, let's write this playbook. And what do we want it to look like? And how can we bring people together? And I'm famous for picking up the phone and kind of volunteering people for things, and kind of say, hey, what do you think about this project? For example, our Searching for a Xena project, that came out of an idea that I had done a Google search, couldn't find much information about our first female counselor, and she won 100 years ago on December 12th, 1921. So I thought, we've got to commemorate this. Started making phone calls around. Bev Eslinger, who's a counselor, got on board. Pilar Martinez, the CEO at the library, got involved. Amy McBain's our project manager, just kind of reaching out to people and saying, hey, let's do this. And it's, again, I know we're in a pandemic and there are huge things that need to get done, but we can't forget about representation at our decision-making tables. We will not have a sustainable, forward-looking, progressive recovery if we don't have our decision-making tables look like the community that they're serving. And they don't right now. They just don't.
Wow, that's really powerful.
And you're doing the same. I mean, if you're not reading Brandi's work, and I'm saying this again to everyone who's listening, you need to follow her and follow her work.
Oh.
Brandi's doing cutting edge things right now, telling stories that have never been told in our country. And again, it's a time to step up and fill that void and help people see that there's a better way, that there's hope on the horizon, but there's a better way to do this, and we can do this together.
You know what? I love what you said, and I wrote it down, and it might be one of my new like go-to anthems. If there's no playbook, then let's write this playbook.
True.
I love it. So, Katherine, let me ask you, who inspires you and why?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Who inspires me? Gonna make me cry.
Okay.
I come from a very strong line of women in my family. So, and like many of us, my grandmother's my mother. I have a twin sister, my sisters.
Wow, you're a twin.
I'm a twin. There's double trouble. She lives in Toronto. And I was raised to always be a doer and to always like ask questions and to not accept that this is the way it's going to be. But more importantly, that you can change the world, but you have to change your community first. You have to, it has to start where you live. And so really collaborating with people and being positive and showing people that there's a way to do something. It's going to take a ton of elbow grease to do it, but there's always a way to do something. And again, I think of, people on our staff that, I come in and I often can see the end point, and it's the elbow grease and the way to get there. So when I look back and being inspired, I come from a long line of women that just they do big things. They think big. They put community first, public service first. I also have an incredible mother-in-law, Mary O'Neill, who was a former MLA. So that public service stuff runs in our family. And it's women in my life that I look to. And again, the women that I work with are really inspiring to me. So there's big leaders around the world that always inspire us, but I think it's the women that are in our tribe, in our collective, that I draw the most energy from and that I'm inspired by most. So I've been very, very lucky to really be surrounded by women that have just always challenged me, but always put community first.
So what would you say if given the opportunity to inspire or speak to another woman, perhaps a young woman who's looking at you and admiring your work and maybe wants to get into leadership one day or politics or, community work, but there's barriers and such that they're facing? What would you tell them to find that path, to create and write that playbook, so you say?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think there's never been a better time to get involved and to help out in your community, because like I said, we're writing a new playbook as we speak. It's very historic, and it's hard to see sometimes how historic this time is. But right now, I often say to young women, I mentor a lot of young women, and I always say, get involved, like start. That's the first thing. And find your passion. Is it politics, or is it in business, or whatever your passion in it is, because that often keeps the fuel in the tank when you're doing the work. Finding good mentors is a really good thing. Women or members of your community that will help, guide you, because it's really important to get that advice early on. And I often hear from women, well, I don't have a mentor, or I can't find a mentor. Find someone that you really inspires you, and go and ask them, like, would you help me, or recommend someone that will help me? Because you will be surprised how generous people will be with their time if they truly see in you a real eagerness to get involved in the community. So finding some support that way, and also just doing the work. For example, I come from a political background where I've seen politics right up close and personal, and often it's, there's the door knocking or the making the phone calls. That's where you learn so much. And don't step over that part of the process. That's where you're going to make friends. You're going to learn lessons, and you're going to learn what you like about the area that you're interested in. And I really always say to folks, that's the part that matters. It's the elbow grease that you're going to put into it. You will go a long way if you put the elbow grease into it and have a vision of, why you're there. It's not just, to get elected or whatever. It's like the service at the end of the day. It's that reason has to be kind of your guiding light, your North Star that whole time. So, and I'm so excited. Again, I'll go back to Searching for Azina. We have so many young women involved with that project. And that's incredible. Like, it's an incredible thing. Women that have no connection to any of these, we've had 31 counselors in Edmonton in 100 years, and many of them have no connection to these women. But again, they're so eager to learn the history, to understand why we haven't had as many women. And not only that, figure out solutions so that in the next 100 years, we're going to finally reach parity. So there's lots of things to do. Find the place where you think you want to fit in and get to work.
Wonderful. So how do you keep your team motivated?
Great question. And I often either communicating as much as possible. Again, because the Zoom calls, it's so easy to just be transactional in a Zoom call. Like, okay, we've got this list done, and trying to check in on one another. And I try to do that as much as possible. When I started, I actually phoned up our staff, everyone on our staff, to say, hi, I've started. I'm sorry I'm not meeting you in person, but I'm happy I'm here. This is who I am. Please, here's my cell phone number. So that contact, you cannot over communicate in a pandemic. I think it's essential to have those lines of communications together. And we've tried a few times, permitting, whether like as far as public health orders, trying to even have small in-person events if possible. That's really critical. Now is not the greatest time, but we've been trying to do that. And also having calls, and I know we're all on this, where it's not just about the business of the day, trying to get to know each other as people, and remembering that we are all experiencing this pandemic, and we all have different things that are hitting us, but we all have a struggle right now. And so getting on the phone, like we had a great United Way campaign this year where we came up with a cookbook, and we had a pet pageant, and we were doing silly things online. So we could always do better. And again, there's no playbook for this. And it's, if there's a good idea, we'll take it, because this is, we don't foresee ourselves being back in an office till January 2020, 2022 at the earliest. The way things are going. So this is a marathon. It isn't a sprint.
Wow.
Yeah, I know when you say that, 2022, we're already thinking and planning that far out. And I hope everybody takes their mind back to when this first started. Remember how we kept thinking, oh, it's going to be a month, or it's going to be 3 weeks, or it will be September. And now we're in this, years into this, a year into it. So just remembering that you can't do everything in a day, and I have to. So I sometimes struggle with that, because I'm so used to, I worked at the journalist pace where every day you're getting stuff done.
Deadlines and
every day is new, and you're moving so quickly. And so for me, I think that's been a huge adjustment for me about, that every day you've got to keep some fuel in the tank for another day. And so picking things, ensuring that you keep up the pace that I can sustain.
So speaking of keeping the fuel in the tank, you're a mother of 3 children, 10 and under. So how do you balance this like high profile career and motherhood, especially in a pandemic?
It's been a challenge. Remote learning back in the spring, I will never, wow, that was the most challenging thing I have ever seen, because again, I had just started this job. I'm trying to get up to speed, trying to deal with everything that's happening, and then going home at night and trying to like learn, grade 3 something. And Yeah, and just the challenges, like our kids have been through a lot, and it's been, we've had adjustments, and I think our children have had, it's been very difficult with sports being canceled or not seeing friends, or just this uncertainty of what's happening in our community. So it has been very difficult. Again, I love getting the kids out to Camp You Ocus, having those family times. Getting outside, trying to disconnect, because all we do is connect online.
Yeah.
That's all we do now, unfortunately. So trying to find those paths, but it's been very difficult. And again, that's why I empathize with, the fact we've seen this unprecedented rise in unpaid labor for women. I mean, women were already disproportionately taking on most of the labor at home, and COVID has just made it really, like, taken it to a whole new level. So I empathize with all the families out there. This has been difficult, and I'm glad our kids are back in school. Like in Edmonton, they are in class, and I think that's been really that's huge because the online learning is difficult. But I understand that when families, like, this has been a really difficult piece of the puzzle for most folks, because you have your professional life and then you're balanced with everything that's happening at home, and then the pandemic's on top of it.
And I'm wondering, so how do you separate your work from your time with your family and motherhood? It's something that I still struggle with.
Yeah,
because I'm so on fire and passionate for my work that I want to be into it all the time, but I have to make an effort to just log out mentally out of that, and be present with my children and with other things. What do you do?
And that's honestly, I struggle with it, and I'm not perfect, and I wish, I know, like, particularly when I get home from work at night, I try to really disconnect, like I'm done for the day. And I think that's why having that separation for me, really, I need that separation. Weekends are really trying to keep those for the kids and family time and fun things. And it's hard too, again, because there's so few things we can actually do safely in our community. So going back again to the outdoors, that has been a lifesaver for us. Going into the river valley, just skating, all those sport things, just doing stuff that does not involve a screen, because all they're doing every day is screen time. So, and I think that will be something long-term post-pandemic. We're really going to have to, like, we're getting into some bad habits when it comes to screen time and all that kind of stuff. So post-pandemic, how can we, particularly for women, ensure that we can find more balance in that? Because this has been stressful for sure, and added to all the labor that was already there.
All right, so before we get to some questions from our audience, let's talk about calls to action. Now, this is something that's very important to you, Katherine. So what are your calls to action for the coming year, I guess?
Yeah, well, and I kind of put that out there earlier. I think, like I said, this is an unprecedented time in our community's history, not just the world's history. And we're seeing the fact that there is this playbook. We can write this if we want to. So staying in touch with the YW as an organization, watching what we're doing on advocacy, becoming educated about it, bringing that into your business, or if you're a government leader, understanding how do we ensure that not one woman, not one girl, not one gender minority, gender diverse person is left behind in this pandemic. So what can you do? And that's staying in touch with us, getting involved, could be donating or volunteering, or just really reading our materials and sharing it with government leaders in your community. So that's a huge call to action, because like I said, I think we'll look back on this, obviously, in this period 50 years from now and say that was a critical moment, and we could have made decisions that made this better for women and gender equity. Because I want in my lifetime, and people say I'm a dreamer, but I will willing to do the hard work. I want gender equity in my lifetime. I look at my daughter all the time and I think how we are so far from gender equity in many ways. Brandi, we could talk for hours about that, and not, Indigenous women in our country, racialized women in our country. Equity does not exist. And It needs to happen in our lifetime. So what are you doing? You're
Mm,
watching this right now. What are you doing in your own world to reach gender equity? We all need to start, not just women. This is not just women's work. This is community work. This is
mm,
men's work. How we raise our boys. It is everything. And until we get our mind around it as a community, that this is actually doable, for one, but what are the steps? We're never going to reach it. So that's my big call to action. I'm so inspired by the work I've seen in the last year. I'm inspired by the people who have stepped forward, by the solutions that are coming out. Um, I think that this is a critical turning point for gender equity.
mhm,
And as someone who's listening and saying, well, it's out of my wheelhouse, it's not. There are many things you can do to support the work. And
mm.
it just takes that I'm willing to put in the elbow grease to do this approach. So that's one of my big call to action. And I hope I've left people inspired, because I think
Yeah.
all of us have a role. All of us do. It's not just me as a CEO or you, Brandi, as a journalist.
Yeah.
How do you raise your children? How do you, all of it plays into what we want as a community.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we are going to go to some Q&A. So there is a question, and I'm not sure the name because it doesn't say here, but the question is, who is one female leader, local, national, or international, who you wish you could meet and chat with about the topic of your choosing?
A recent one, because it changes for me day to day, but Roberta Jameson, I recently heard her on a panel discussion, and people who don't know her work, she's a force in our country. She leads on many Indigenous issues, and she is a force. And I think her leadership is so critical to this moment. Like I said, the talk I was on, it was hosted by the federal government, and she said, we don't build back better isn't going to cut it. And she had that, I just loved how direct she was and how passionate she was. So she's right at the top of the list. And just, yeah, it changes as a
Yeah.
journalist, changes for me all the time. But like I said, we have so many incredible women in this country. We need to celebrate them. We need to listen to them, and we need to help them do their work.
Wonderful. Now, we're going to let the audience know that we are opening this up for Q&As. If anybody has a question for Katherine, please type it in the chat box. And Katherine, I'm interested. This is something that, is important to me personally. All your work is incredible, but you are particularly passionate and care about the different crises affecting Indigenous people in Canada, but specifically the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Tell me why, and just like when you first, I guess, were aware of it, and why you think it's important for women to become allies, with Indigenous women and girls in this country.
As a journalist, when I was working for the Globe and Mail, I did cover a lot of stories involving missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it was so frustrating, and I can sure you can relate, Brandi, is that I would write these stories and they would never be on the front page, or I couldn't get people to care, or I just couldn't get the space to tell the story properly. And I feel that this is a national emergency and should be treated as such. We need to understand how we got to this point. We need to look as a community on the solutions, and there are different solutions in different parts of the country, and amplifying the voices of the people who are doing the work, and actually getting to work. Like, okay, enough talking about it, because we know it's happening. And
Yeah.
what are the solutions? How do we make lasting short-term change, but lasting change as well? And again, I'm so proud of the Y, because we want to be an ally. We want to be a supporter. We want to help bring people together to start talking about those solutions in Edmonton and area, and then help share them out in the rest of Canada, because the cool thing about the YWCA is we're part of this not only national federation, but we have chapters all over the world. We have this big reach, and so telling the story, we can often amplify a voice in a way that other organizations might not have that reach. So it matters to me. It should matter to all of us.
Yeah.
And I look to Brandi. You are the foremost expert in our country as far as a journalist right now that's working in our country. You have put this on the radar in England, all over the world. And so if you're looking for information, if you're looking on ways to be educated, I really highly recommend going to Brandi's work as a starting point, and then going from there. So
that's just an honor, Catherine. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question from Carson. And it is, tell us the story of one of your most favorite moments from the past year at the YWCA.
There's so many. It's been a lot. It's been bittersweet because of all I know our community's suffering, but there's been some really, like, getting to know our staff, because they all have such different backgrounds, but what unifies us all is that we're just really care about helping our community, making our world a better place. Like, it is at the core of the why. But a funny story, because there's been too many, but one really funny story, and I still chuckle about it, is it goes back to You Ocus. So we were doing that cabin project, and these were kids' cabins. There was the yurt, and then we had a cabin, and we were so lucky that all these companies stepped up and helped make it look good. And it was a little retreat, and we got Justine Ma to do the design work. And it was so good that Western Living magazine, which is a design magazine, did a feature on
Where is it?
Yeah. So these little cabins, and it just shows you that, the smallest idea, if you get the right people working on it, if you put some love and energy into it, the world's your oyster. And I still chuckle about it, because that's a big design magazine. And
I can look it up. I want to go see it.
It's awesome. On Western Living. It's on Western Living magazine, and thanks to the Adams Agency, helped get that.
That is so cool.
Yeah, so it was just a really good example of, when you do things, do them as well as you can. Bring joy and happiness to what you're trying to do, or just passion to it, and it went viral. Like, it was on a bunch of sites and stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome, and it was fun. It just showed, like, if you had asked me when I started on the first day, the camp is going to end up in a design magazine at the end of this, I don't think that would have been the first thing I would have said. And going back to those first few months, we had to cancel our biggest in-person fundraiser. We had to cancel our summer program. So all these revenue issues, you're like, how are we going to pay our bills, still help people? And we've been able to, we have a surplus this year, which I'm very proud of. And it speaks volumes about our staff, because everybody figured out ways to bring in more money or trim costs. And so we're in a very strong financial position, and it's all because of our staff. It's our
That's
staff
wonderful.
Innovating. So yeah.
So we have time for just maybe 2 more questions. I have a question here. Is equity as a goal for societal change present in the form of a target people can look to and work towards collectively, or does it still have yet to be defined so that we could then work down from it?
Great question. I know what they're saying. So there's that common goal, gender equity. Our mission is choice and opportunity and equity for all. So what does that mean? Well, in our community, I always say, I use the lenses, is this an equitable situation? And for example, on our council, 2 of our counselors are women and the rest are men, 12. So finding ways to make sure that every room you go into, that there's a gender lens there, that you're thinking about equity. Are you thinking if the right people are at the table? So there's that overall umbrella mission. How do we create that community, that equity? But then how are we doing in our day-to-day or in our businesses? How are we ensuring our hiring practices are ensuring equity? Like, all of that just trickles down into your day-to-day and all your policies and procedures. And Again, going back to the Searching for Izina project, which has been so inspiring to me because it started out so small, but it showed us that we've had 31 women. We didn't know this when we started. 31 women in 100 years, and there's been 238 men. There has never been a woman of color or an Indigenous woman on our council, ever, in a city of 1 million people. Unacceptable. Oh, I know. So doing the education, but then saying, what's the road path forward to ensure that we are meeting these equity goals? And if we're doing that, all of us in our businesses, our community groups, our boards, etc., we'll get there. It's just going to take a lot of changing the way we think of how things operate and making that room to ensure it happens, and that we're not just, it's not a phase and like, oh, we want to do this, that it's how we think, how we change our thinking.
Okay, and we have one last question. If we could maybe keep it to I don't know, about a minute here. My TV experience is coming up. My broadcast. Pilar says, Katherine, you are an inspiration and so full of positive energy. How do you build and sustain resilience within yourself and your team? Good question.
Thank you, Pilar. And Pilar is, for those who don't know, Pilar Martinez. She's our CEO at Edmonton Public Library. And she's also been, we could do a power lunch with Pilar because she's been running the library system over the last year. And that has been, I'm sure, really just all the public health changes has probably been really, really hard and challenging. And so I'm a huge Pilar fan. So great question, Pilar. Quickly, resiliency, it's just coming and always knowing my mission, always understanding like what is the overriding goal, always having my values up front, transparency, openness. And I'm just a positive person by nature. I've seen war up close and personal. It's a scar that lives on my heart every day because I have seen the worst that humankind can offer. And we should never, I want to be a leader that brings out the best in people, not the worst. And as people in our community, be looking for those leaders who are doing that, because the people who are bringing out the worst in us, they'll take you down the wrong path. So again, and just on self-care, getting outside, reading books, being with my kids, just remembering that there's so much beauty in the every day and seizing it as much as possible.
Hi. Well, that went really well and it flew.
Yeah. Hi, Brandi.
I could have
so
gone on and on. No, thank you. It's such a pleasure. It's such an honor. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you again. Thank you to all our attendees. And I'm going to hand it back over to Amber.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandi, so much for moderating the Power Lunch speaker series today. And thank you, Katherine, for your leadership and your guidance through a tumultuous year that none of us expected. And we have a little surprise for you, actually. If you would just scooch off camera and open your door, there is something at your door. Oh, cool. And as she does that, I just want to thank everyone here for joining us today. We appreciate your support. Please stay in touch and help us continue our mission of building stronger, safer, and more equitable communities for everyone. Head to our social media channels for more information about how you can get involved or donate. And Katherine's back.
All right. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
That is a framed photo of the first YWCA house in Edmonton. That is Cushing House. And that is where that house was donated to the YWCA by the Cushing family, and it would house women who came out west, young women who came out west, offering them appropriate accommodations where they could learn appropriate skills to be appropriately employed. And we know how much you love our history and how much that has sustained you through this past year. So from the staff and the board, our sincere thank you. And there's one more thing for you. It is a photo book. We've put together a photo book of some of our highlights of the last year with some messages from the staff and board. COVID has delayed that shipment to maybe tomorrow. We'll see when it gets here, but we'll make sure it gets in your hands so you can see and reflect back on the impact that you've had on our organization and the messages of thanks from everybody that's been helping you along this journey for the first year.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our staff, our board of volunteers, all the volunteers that help us, and the community at large. This has been an incredible experience, and I'm honored and privileged to be leading this organization. So thank you. And thank you, Brandi, for being here today.
Agreed. And so just as everyone leaves out, I want to remind you that our next webinar is Monday, April 12th. This webinar will explore the history and experience of Indigenous women running for office in Alberta, moderated by Edmonton City Councillor Aaron Paquette. This panel discussion will feature Catherine Swampy, Taz Augustine, Cheryl Shannon Greyeyes, and Gabrielle Blatz. You can find more information on our website, and the link for registration has been posted in the chat. You won't want to miss it, everyone. See you then. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.